a former Navy SEAL, bought the cheap house everyone in town was too afraid to enter. But on the very first night, his loyal German shepherd stopped in front of a sealed wall, and the dead room behind it lit up. The people whispered that the house was haunted, yet the dog kept returning to the same place like it was trying to save someone who was already gone. What the Navy SEAL discovered inside that forgotten room would uncover years of grief, lies, and a promise a mother could never let die. And while the whole town tried to bury the truth, one old house kept a single light burning through every winter storm. Before we begin, tell us where you're watching from, and if stories like this touch your heart, please like and subscribe to help us reach 1,000 followers so we can continue creating meaningful stories together. Now, let's step into Mercy House, where sometimes the greatest miracle is simply finding a light that never gave up on you. The first thing Ethan Calder noticed about Brindle Falls was the light. Not the kind spilling from neon signs or crowded storefronts. This light was colder, quieter. Winter sunlight stretched across the frozen lake in pale silver bands, turning the snow into fields of shattered glass. The whole town looked like it had been carved from ice and old memory. His pickup truck groaned as it climbed the narrow road leading toward Mercy House. Salt crackled beneath the tires. Wind brushed against the doors in long sighs that sounded strangely human. Beside him, Ranger lifted his head. The German shepherd was 6 years old now, older around the eyes than the rest of him. Thick cream-gray fur darkened along the spine and ears, and a black harness with muted dark red trim wrapped around his broad chest. His amber eyes moved constantly, calm and alert in the way only working dogs could manage. Ranger never wasted motion. Even his breathing sounded disciplined. Ethan rested one hand on the steering wheel and the other briefly against the dog's neck. "We made it," he muttered. Ranger blinked once, unimpressed. That earned the faintest smile Ethan had managed in weeks. At 35, Ethan still carried the shape of military life in every movement. About 6 feet tall, lean and compact instead of bulky, he moved with the controlled economy of someone trained to survive chaos by conserving energy. His tactical combat shirt, military gray, faded at the shoulders and cuffs, looked softened by years of washing and bad weather. Underneath, the dark red thermal layer showed slightly at the collar. His earth-brown combat pants had worn knees and sagging cargo pockets from constant use. Old military boots pressed the gas pedal. An old scratched military watch sat against his wrist, like something that had forgotten how to belong anywhere else. His face was clean-shaven, exposing the hard, square jaw and pronounced cheekbones beneath skin weathered pale by northern cold. Dark brown hair rested slightly longer than regulation military length. But the thing people noticed most was always the eyes. Gray-blue, steady, not unkind, just tired in ways sleep could never fix. The house finally appeared through the trees. Mercy House sat on a low hill overlooking North Lark Lake. The roof sagged slightly near one corner. Snow rested across the porch railings like folded blankets. A dead-looking apple tree stood in the yard, branches twisted against the pale sky. The place looked abandoned, but not empty. Ethan parked slowly. For a moment, neither he nor Ranger moved. The silence around the house felt different from ordinary silence. Not threatening exactly, just heavy, like a church after everyone had gone home. He stepped out first. Cold air immediately bit through his clothes. Ranger jumped down beside him, boots crunching softly in snow. The dog froze, ears forward, head tilted, watching the house. "You smell something?" Ranger didn't move. That unsettled Ethan more than barking would have. The realtor arrived 10 minutes later in a dusty SUV that looked too clean for northern winters. June Harlan climbed out quickly, pulling her camel-colored wool coat tighter around herself. She was younger than Ethan expected. Maybe 28? Slender build. pale skin reddened by cold wind, dark blonde hair tied low at the nape of her neck. There was a softness to her face that made her look approachable, but her brown eyes carried permanent tension, like someone constantly rehearsing bad news in her head. "You actually came," she said. Ethan frowned slightly. "I signed the papers." "Still." She glanced toward the house. "Most people change their minds." Ranger moved closer to Ethan's leg. June noticed the dog and softened immediately. "Well," she said quietly, "at least you brought somebody smart." That almost made Ethan laugh. Almost. She handed him the keys. Metal clicked softly in his palm. For a second, June hesitated, rubbing gloved fingers together against the cold. Then she said, "If you see lights at night, don't panic." Ethan looked up slowly. "What kind of lights?" June instantly regretted speaking. "You know how small towns are," she said too fast. "People tell stories. Most of it's nonsense." "Most?" Wind moved through the trees. June stared at the upstairs windows of Mercy House with visible discomfort. "Good luck, Mr. Calder." Then she left before he could ask another question. The sound of her SUV faded down the road until only wind remained again. Ethan looked at Ranger. "You hearing this?" Ranger stared at the house, not wagging, not growling, just watching, like a soldier waiting for instructions. The inside of Mercy House smelled like cedar wood, dust, and old winters. Ethan spent the afternoon hauling in supplies: canned food, tools, blankets, a duffel bag with almost everything he still owned. The house creaked constantly. Floorboards complained beneath his boots. Pipes groaned somewhere inside the walls. Every sound felt amplified by emptiness. Still, it wasn't unpleasant. The living room faced the frozen lake through wide front windows. The old stone fireplace dominated one wall. Faded books still rested on shelves beside a worn armchair with patched fabric arms. Someone had lived carefully here once. Not richly, lovingly. Ranger wandered room to room in silence. Then the dog stopped near the staircase. Ethan noticed immediately. "What is it?" Ranger climbed the stairs slowly. Ethan followed. The second-floor hallway stretched narrow and dim beneath slanted ceilings. Old framed photographs hung crookedly along the walls. Ethan passed one, showing a smiling woman beside a younger man in an orange winter rescue jacket. Mabel Wren and her son, maybe. He kept walking. Then Ranger stopped completely. At the far end of the hallway, in front of a section of wall, the dog stood perfectly still. Ethan frowned. The wall looked ordinary at first glance, but when he stepped closer, details emerged. The wood grain didn't fully match the rest of the hallway. The paint tone was slightly different. The nails looked newer. Not new, just newer than everything around them, like someone had closed something up years ago. Ranger pressed his nose near the wall. His ears twitched, then he sat down without taking his eyes off it. Ethan touched the wood. Cold. Solid. But behind it, maybe imagination. Maybe not. He thought he heard the faintest sound. A tiny electrical click. Then silence again. That night, sometime after midnight, Ethan woke suddenly. No nightmare. No sound of gunfire trapped inside his skull for once. Just instinct. Ranger was already awake. The German Shepherd stood beside the bedroom window, body stiff, staring outside into the snow. Ethan moved carefully toward him. "What is it?" Ranger didn't look away. Ethan followed the dog's gaze toward the second-floor hallway window visible from outside, and his breath stopped. For 3 seconds, maybe 4, a warm yellow light glowed faintly behind the upstairs wall. Not from a window, not from outside, from inside the sealed section itself. Then it vanished. The entire house went dark again. Ethan stood frozen. The heating was dead. The electricity to the property had supposedly been shut off years ago. Behind him, Ranger let out a low sound in his throat. Not fear. Recognition. The next morning, Ethan drove into town before sunrise. Brindle Falls looked almost gentle in early morning light. Snow rested along rooftops and shop signs. Smoke drifted lazily from chimneys. Somewhere nearby, church bells rang softly through the cold air. He stopped at Juniper Diner because it was the only place open. Warm air wrapped around him the second he entered. Coffee, bacon grease, cinnamon, old wood. The scent hit him with sudden force, dragging up memories of roadside diners outside military bases, where exhausted men pretended not to be exhausted. Several conversations stopped when he walked in. Not openly hostile, just curious. Careful. A waitress pointed him toward the counter. Nora Bellamy stood behind it, pouring coffee. She looked about 50, broad-shouldered and sturdy from years carrying trays and heavy kitchen boxes. Brown hair streaked with silver was tied loosely back. Her face carried deep laugh lines around sharp, observant eyes. She looked like the kind of woman who had fed half the town through storms and funerals. Her eyes landed on Ethan, then on Ranger, then briefly on Ethan's combat shirt. "You're the man who bought Mercy House." Not a question. Ethan nodded once. Nora filled a mug without asking. "That place always finds somebody eventually." "What's that supposed to mean?" Nora slid coffee toward him. "It means houses are like dogs." She glanced down at Ranger. "Some of them decide who gets to stay." Ranger rested near Ethan's boots, calm but alert. Nora studied him for a moment. "Pretty dog. He's smarter than most people I've worked with. That's not exactly a high bar these days." A few older men nearby chuckled quietly. The tension loosened slightly. But when Ethan mentioned the upstairs wall and the light, silence returned almost immediately. Nora stopped wiping the counter. Outside, wind rattled the diner windows softly. Finally, she sighed. "Mabel Wren had a son," she said quietly. "Elias." The name settled strangely in the room. "People around here trusted him," Nora continued. "Search and rescue, Winter Lake Patrol. He pulled folks out of storms nobody else would even drive into." She looked toward the snowy road outside. He died out on North Lark during a blizzard almost 10 years ago. Ethan listened without interrupting. "After that," Nora said, "Mabel sealed his room shut." Even the coffee suddenly tasted colder. She had workers build a wall over part of the upstairs hallway. Nobody was allowed in again. "And the lights?" Nora looked directly at him then. Not dramatic, not spooky, just deeply sad. "She never turned them off." Ethan drove back toward Mercy House later that morning beneath a pale silver sky. Ranger rested quietly beside him. But neither of them noticed the dark SUV parked far down the frozen roadside overlooking the house. Inside it, a man wearing black leather gloves watched Ethan's truck disappear through the trees. Then the man slowly lowered a pair of binoculars and smiled. By the time Ethan Calder left Juniper Diner, the morning had brightened enough to make Brindle Falls look innocent. That bothered him. Sunlight lay clean across the snowbanks. Icicles glittered from shop awnings. A man in a red knit cap shoveled the walkway outside the hardware store while whistling badly enough to offend both music and nearby birds. Across the street, children in puffy coats waited for a school bus, their laughter rising into the cold like sparks. Nothing about the town looked like a place keeping a secret. Yet every time Ethan passed a storefront window, someone glanced up. Not long. Not openly. Just enough. Ranger walked beside him with the steady discipline of an old working dog, cream-gray fur catching the pale sunlight, black harness snug around his chest. His amber eyes moved from person to person, not aggressive, not friendly, simply recording. Ethan had seen that expression on him during patrols years ago, before a door opened, before a man lied, before silence became dangerous. "Yeah," Ethan murmured. "I feel it too." Ranger's ear flicked as if answering. Nora Bellamy's words had followed Ethan out of the diner. Mabel sealed his room shut. She never turned the lights off. It should have sounded like grief. Instead, in Brindle Falls, people spoke of it like a warning carved into bone. Ethan crossed toward the county records annex, a squat brick building beside the post office. Inside, the air smelled of paper, floor wax, and old radiators. A clerk with silver glasses and a cardigan too cheerful for winter handed him a thin property folder after he showed identification. Mercy House had been purchased cleanly. County auction. Back taxes. No active legal hold. But the file had scars. Old boundary disputes. Notes about repairs never inspected. A handwritten complaint from 8 years earlier about visible unexplained interior light despite utility disconnect. Another page mentioned a proposed development zone around North Lark Lake, filed by a private investment group Ethan did not recognize. He read the name twice. Vale Harbor Properties. His finger paused on the paper. A faint instinct stirred. Not proof. Not even suspicion yet. Just the old internal pressure of a pattern forming before the mind could name it. When he looked down, Ranger was staring toward the glass door. A sheriff's cruiser had pulled up outside. The man who stepped out moved with a stiffness that came less from age than from carrying too many winters inside the joints. Sheriff Callum Voss was somewhere in his early 50s, tall and lean, with a long, weathered face and short brown-gray hair trimmed close. His jaw was clean-shaven, but gray shadow lived beneath the skin as if it had settled there permanently. His dark winter sheriff jacket was neat, badge polished, duty belt arranged with the careful precision of a man who still believed order could protect him from memory. His eyes were brown, deep-set and tired. Not tired like a man needing sleep. Tired like a man who had once prayed for forgiveness and never heard anything answer. He opened the door and looked straight at Ethan. "Mr. Calder." Ethan closed the folder. "Sheriff?" Callum's gaze dropped briefly to Ranger. "Dog military?" "Trained." "Looks it." Ranger sat without being told, but his eyes never left Callum's hands. The sheriff noticed. Something like pain moved across his face so quickly it almost wasn't there. "Walk with me," Callum said. It was not a request exactly, but Ethan followed. Outside, cold air cut sharper than before. They moved down the sidewalk past the hardware store, the post office, the tiny library with paper snowflakes taped crookedly in the windows. For a while, Callum said nothing. Then, "You went asking about Elias Wren." "I asked about the house I bought." "That house and Elias are the same conversation around here." Ethan glanced at him. "You knew him." Callum looked toward the lake beyond town, barely visible between buildings. "I pulled him out of enough trouble to know he usually found it while helping someone else." There was no smile in the words, but something close to affection lived under them. "He was search and rescue?" Ethan asked. "Volunteer lake rescue. Ice calls, storm calls, missing hikers, fool tourists who thought frozen water was just a prettier sidewalk." Callum exhaled through his nose. Elias had this idea that if someone was scared and cold, rules could wait. Sounds like his mother. That struck something. Callum stopped walking. For a second, Ethan thought the sheriff might argue. Instead, Callum looked older. Mabel Wren fed half this county at one time or another. Truckers, widows, kids with nowhere safe to sleep. She kept blankets by the back door and soup on the stove. Mercy House earned its name. "Then why does everyone talk about it like it's cursed?" Callum's mouth tightened. "Because people prefer curses. They're cleaner than guilt." A gust of wind swept snow powder off a nearby roof. It drifted between them like ash. Callum continued, lower now. "Elias died during the Lake North rescue. Blizzard came in faster than forecast. Family from out of state drove past a warning barricade. Vehicle slid near the ice shelf. Elias went out before the second unit arrived. You were there? Callum's eyes stayed on the lake. I was late. 2 words. Flat. But Ethan heard the grave beneath them. In our line of work, Ethan said quietly, late can happen even when you're running. Callum looked at him then, and for the first time, the sheriff seemed to see past the old combat shirt, the boots, the quiet posture. He saw the graveyards Ethan carried, too. Maybe that was why his next words were gentler. Leave the sealed room alone. Ethan said nothing. Not because of ghosts, Callum added, because some things were closed for a reason. By Mabel. Yes. And now the house is mine. Callum's face hardened, but not with anger, with fear wearing a badge. Ownership doesn't make every door yours to open. Ethan held his gaze. No, he said. But fire risk does. So does strange electrical activity in a house that's supposedly disconnected. The sheriff looked away first. If you find anything dangerous, call an electrician. I will. And Mr. Calder? Ethan waited. Brindle Falls is peaceful because people learned what not to disturb. Ranger gave one low breath beside Ethan's leg. Not a growl, a judgment. Callum heard it and almost smiled, but it died before reaching his eyes. Smart dog, he said. Then he turned and walked back toward his cruiser. Ethan watched him go, thinking of something Nora had said without saying. People here were not afraid of Mercy House because they believed in ghosts. They were afraid because the house remembered who they had been before fear taught them to look away. When Ethan returned to Mercy House that afternoon, Ranger did not go upstairs first. He went to the fireplace. The German shepherd lowered his nose to the old stone hearth, sniffed once, then turned and crossed the living room to the staircase. Halfway up he stopped, looked back, and waited. Ethan followed. At the sealed wall, Ranger sat. Then he lifted one paw and touched the wood, not scratching, not forcing, just pressing the way a child might place a hand against a hospital window. From behind the wall came the faintest sound. Not a voice, not a knock, a soft electrical tick. Then another. Then, for one breath, a warmth seemed to pass through the boards beneath Ethan's fingertips. Ranger lowered his head, and Ethan, who had not prayed in years, suddenly felt as if he were standing outside the last room of someone's heart. He did not open it. Not yet. Instead, he went looking for facts. The basement stairs complained under his boots as he descended with a flashlight. The basement smelled of damp concrete, mouse dust, and old wood. Nothing supernatural waited there. Just paint cans, broken shelving, a rusted snow shovel, and the ordinary sadness of things kept because throwing them away had once felt too final. Near the back, behind a warped cabinet, Ethan found a plastic storage tub with a cracked blue lid. Inside were old tools wrapped in towels, wire strippers, electrical tape hardened with age, a small voltage meter, hand-drawn diagrams on yellowing paper. Elias's name appeared on one corner. E. Wren, backup circuit / west roof panel / rescue radio line. Ethan spread the papers across the workbench. There it was. A simple off-grid backup system. A small solar panel installed on the rear roof. Battery storage. A dedicated emergency light and radio circuit. Not magic. Not madness. Engineering built by a man who understood that Winter did not care whether the grid was working when someone needed help. Ethan felt something inside him ease, then tighten again. Because explanations did not erase sorrow. They only made it human. He carried the diagrams upstairs as evening fell. The house turned blue around him, shadows pooling in corners, the frozen lake darkening beyond the windows. Ranger stayed close, quieter than usual. On the second-floor landing, Ethan examined the sealed wall again. If the diagram was right, the room behind it had once been Elias's. The backup circuit ran there first, Then to the radio line. He could almost picture it. A young rescue worker sitting by the window during storms, listening to radio chatter, waiting for calls no one wanted to hear. A mother downstairs keeping soup warm. A town believing that as long as the light in that room stayed on, somebody would answer when winter became cruel. Then the son died. The mother sealed the room, but the light remained. Because grief, like bad wiring, sometimes kept sending current through places everyone else thought were dead. Ethan's phone buzzed. Unknown number. He answered without speaking. For 3 seconds, there was only faint static. Then a man's voice, smooth and low. "You're new in town, Mr. Calder. Friendly advice: old houses cost more than people expect." Ethan went still. "Who is this?" A soft chuckle. "Someone who knows Mercy House has ruined better men than you." The call ended. Ranger rose instantly, hackles lifting. Ethan lowered the phone and stared at the sealed wall. Outside, the last light drained from Brindle Falls. Snow began falling again, gentle and bright beneath the darkening sky. A few minutes later, from behind the wall, the yellow glow returned. This time, Ethan did not step back. He stood in the hallway with Ranger at his side, watching the thin seam of light breathe through the imperfect boards. And for the first time since buying the house, he understood something clearly. Someone did not want him afraid of Mercy House. Someone wanted him gone. By morning, the threat on Ethan Calder's phone had turned into something colder than fear. It had become a question. Someone knew he was inside Mercy House. Someone knew he had started looking. And whoever had called him did not sound like a drunk local trying to scare the newcomer. The voice had been too smooth, too controlled, the kind of voice that believed money could polish cruelty until it resembled advice. Old houses cost more than people expect. Ethan stood in the kitchen before sunrise, staring at his phone on the counter. Ranger lay near the back door, but he was not sleeping. His cream-gray body rested still against the worn floorboards, black harness catching a thin line of light from the window. Only his amber eyes moved. Every time the house creaked, one ear twitched. "You didn't like him either," Ethan said. Ranger blinked slowly. "That's what I thought." The kitchen smelled faintly of dust, coffee, and cold wood. Ethan had managed to get the old stove working enough to heat water, though the burner hissed like a snake with a grudge. He poured instant coffee into a chipped mug he had found in a cupboard. On the bottom of the mug, faded blue letters read, "Lake Rescue Chili Cook-Off, 2013. Elias's world kept appearing in fragments, a mug, a wire diagram, a sealed wall, a name people lowered their voices to speak. Ethan took the property folder, Elias's backup circuit drawings, and the notes he had copied from the county file. He spread them across the table. Ranger rose, walked over, and placed his muzzle near the paper, sniffing once with great seriousness. "You got something to add?" Ranger sneezed. "Strong contribution." The faint humor died quickly. Vale Harbor Properties appeared twice in the county records, once as an interested party in a development proposal around North Lark Lake, once in a boundary-related note filed before the auction, then withdrawn. Ethan did not know who ran the company yet, but he knew pressure when he saw its fingerprints. After years in the military, Ethan had learned that threats rarely began with violence. Usually they began with paperwork, a permit delayed, a warning delivered, a door left unlocked when it should not have been. By mid-morning, Ethan drove back into town to find June Harlan. Her real estate office occupied the narrow second floor above a pharmacy. A brass bell chimed when Ethan entered. The room smelled of printer ink and lavender air freshener. Framed photos of lake cabins lined the walls, all bright windows, fresh decks, smiling families, and none of the mold, debt, or silence that usually came with old houses. June looked up from her desk, and went pale when she saw him. She wore the same camel-colored wool coat as before, though indoors it hung open over a cream turtleneck and dark trousers. Her dark blonde hair was pulled tighter today, as if she had needed control over at least one thing in her life. Under the office lights, Ethan noticed faint shadows beneath her eyes. "Mr. Calder," she said, "is something wrong with the house?" "Someone called me last night." Her hand tightened around a pen. Ethan noticed. "Warned me old houses cost more than people expect." June looked toward the closed office door behind him. "Did they say who they were?" "No." "Then maybe it was just someone being cruel." "You believe that?" She swallowed. "No." For a moment, neither spoke. Ethan set a copy of the Vale Harbor note on her desk. "I found this in the county file." June stared at it like it might burn her. "I can't discuss private clients. I didn't ask you to." Her eyes lifted. Fear lived there, but not guilt. Not exactly. More like a person caught between a locked door and a winter storm. "I was told to make sure the auction went through quickly," she said at last, voice low. "Not illegally, just quickly. No extra questions, no extended inspections, no historical review." "By who?" "My broker, but he was taking calls from Gideon Vale's people." The name settled into the room. Gideon Vale. Ethan waited. June rubbed her thumb along the edge of the paper. "He wants the North Lake Corridor. Cabins, old lots, empty land, anything close to the access road. There's a luxury resort proposal. Private docks, event lodge, winter spa, the kind of place where rich people pay a fortune to pretend they discovered silence." Ethan almost smiled at that. June did not. "Mercy House sits at the old emergency access point," she continued. "There's a well on the property and a service road down to the lake. If Vale owns it, he controls the easiest route in." "And if he doesn't?" "The project gets harder. Not impossible, just harder." Harder was often enough to make powerful men impatient. June leaned back, and for the first time she looked younger than 28. Not childish, but worn down too early. "I should have told you more before you signed. Why didn't you?" "My father's medical bills," she said quietly. "My job, my broker, pick one. None of them are noble." Ethan studied her. Shame had a smell, not literal like blood or smoke, but close enough. June had it all over her. She was not clean, but she was not rotten either. "Do you have emails?" Her face tightened. "I might." "That means yes. That means I'm scared." Ethan nodded once. "Good. Scared people make fewer stupid moves than brave ones." For the first time, June gave a weak laugh. It sounded almost painful. When Ethan stepped out of the office, Ranger was waiting at the bottom of the stairs. That should have been impossible. Ethan had left him in the truck with the windows cracked, the doors locked, and the engine off for less than 10 minutes. Yet the German shepherd stood on the sidewalk below, calm as a monk and twice as judgmental, his black and red harness dusted with snow. A small boy across the street pointed and shouted, "Mom, that dog opened a truck." Ranger ignored the accusation. He crossed the sidewalk, took Ethan's sleeve gently between his teeth, and pulled. Not toward the truck, not toward the diner, toward the road leading back to Mercy House. Ethan looked at him. "What did you hear?" Ranger pulled again, harder this time. There was no panic in him, only certainty. The same certainty Ethan had once seen before ambushes, before hidden explosives, before the world revealed teeth. So Ethan stopped asking questions. He followed the dog. Back at Mercy House, the air around the yard had changed. Snow still lay smooth across most of the property, but Ranger moved straight past the porch and toward the old apple tree. Its black branches clawed at the sky, heavy with ice. Ethan had barely noticed it before, except as part of the house's sadness, a dead old thing keeping watch. Ranger lowered his nose to the frozen ground near the trunk. Then he began to dig, Ranger? The dog ignored him. Snow flew backward. Dirt followed, dark and hard. Ranger dug with controlled urgency, not wild excitement. His paws struck something metallic with a dull sound. Ethan crouched and cleared the remaining dirt with gloved hands. A metal box lay beneath the roots, wrapped in weathered oilcloth. It was not large, maybe the size of a bread loaf, but someone had buried it deliberately, deep enough to hide, shallow enough to recover. Ethan carried it inside. The lock was rusted but weak. A screwdriver and careful pressure opened it. Inside were photographs, several folded letters sealed in plastic sleeves, an old brass key, and a note written in a woman's careful hand. If I cannot open his door, let this stay where the tree remembers him. Ethan sat back. Mabel. Ranger rested beside him, breathing quietly. The first photograph showed Mabel Wren years younger, silver hair pinned low, face lined but strong. She stood beside Elias, who wore an orange rescue parka and carried a radio clipped to his chest. He looked around 30, with light brown hair, a square, honest face, and eyes that seemed made for reassurance. His smile had no performance in it, just warmth. In another photo, Elias stood under the apple tree holding a ladder while Mabel tied ribbon around one branch. Someone had written on the back, "First light after the storm." IWW. The letters were harder. Ethan read slowly. They were not love letters, not exactly. They were records of worry. Mabel writing that Elias had come home troubled after rescuing an elderly couple whose heat had been shut off the same week someone pressured them to sell their lakeside lot. Elias writing notes about winter calls, where the same names appeared again and again. Vale Harbor, land options, emergency access, deferred maintenance. One letter mentioned a woman named Rachel Pike. Rachel says she has copies. She is frightened. She trusts Elias because he helped her daughter during the freeze last year. She wants to meet before the next storm. Ethan read the line twice. He did not know Rachel Pike yet, but the name felt like a wire pulled tight through the past. The brass key had a paper tag tied to it with brittle string. Pantry stairs, lower wall. Ethan found the place an hour later. There was a narrow storage space beneath the stairs, half hidden behind stacked paint cans and old blankets. The lower wall panel looked ordinary, but when he pressed near the base, it shifted. Behind it sat a small fireproof lockbox. The brass key turned. Inside were journals, copied property papers, a small USB drive sealed in plastic, and a green notebook swollen slightly from age. Ethan opened the notebook first. The handwriting belonged to Elias. Neat, practical, not dramatic. Names, dates, lake addresses, notes about people being pressured to sell. Mrs. Hanley says man in dark SUV came twice. Callum says file complaint officially. She is scared. Rachel P. has payroll access. Says company names do not match public filings. Need state police, not local. Ethan felt the kitchen grow colder around him. This was no ghost story. It was a ledger of pressure. And Elias had been gathering it before he died. By late afternoon, Ethan drove to a small phone repair shop, wedged between a laundromat and a closed flower store. The sign read, "Finch Fix-It," in peeling blue letters. Mara Finch stood behind the counter sawing something tiny beneath a magnifying lamp. She looked about 33, tall and slim, with dark brown hair cut just above her shoulders and sharp hazel green eyes that seemed to take things apart faster than her tools did. A dark denim jacket lined with shearling hung over a black shirt. Her jeans were dark, boots practical, hands steady. There was a guardedness to her face, like someone who had learned early that kindness sometimes came with invoices. She looked at Ethan, then at Ranger, then at the USB drive in Ethan's hand. If this is about recovering vacation photos, I'm closed. It belonged to Elias Wren. The soldering iron stopped moving. Mara's expression changed so subtly most people would have missed it. Ethan did not. "You should leave," she said. "I found it at Mercy House." Now she looked at him fully. For a long moment, the shop hummed around them refrigerator from the laundromat next door, fluorescent lights overhead, wind scraping snow against the window. Mara set the soldering tool down. "Mabel let me sleep in her kitchen when I was 16, she said quietly. 3 nights. She never asked why. Just gave me soup and said I could talk when words stopped hurting." Ethan said nothing. Mara took the USB. "If this has what I think it has, people will start pretending they don't remember things. They already are." Her mouth tightened. "Then maybe it's time somebody reminded them." When Ethan returned to Mercy House after dusk, the snow around the back door was disturbed. Ranger noticed first. The dog lowered his head, hackles lifting. He moved toward the kitchen entrance, sniffing. Ethan drew the flashlight from his belt and stepped inside. Nothing obvious was missing. But upstairs, at the far end of the hallway, fresh marks scarred the sealed wall. Someone had tried to pry at the boards. Near one nail, a strip of black fabric had caught and torn. Ethan removed it carefully. It smelled faintly of expensive cologne and lake mud. Ranger sniffed once, then growled. Low. Certain. Ethan stood in the dark hallway with the torn fabric in his hand, knowing now that the buried box had not been forgotten by everyone. Someone else wanted what was behind that wall, and they had come close enough to touch it. By dawn, the gouges on the sealed wall looked uglier. Night had made them mysterious. Morning made them personal. Ethan Calder stood at the end of the upstairs hallway with a flashlight in one hand and the torn strip of black fabric sealed inside a plastic freezer bag in the other. The boards covering Elias Wren's room carried 3 fresh pry marks near the lower seam. Whoever had come inside had not been guessing. They had known exactly where to work. Ranger sat beside him, rigid and watchful, his cream-gray fur catching the weak light from the hall window. The German shepherd's amber eyes stayed fixed on the damaged boards. Every few seconds, his nostrils flared, drawing in scents Ethan could only imagine. Old dust, disturbed wood, lake mud, the trace of expensive cologne, maybe even fear. Ethan touched one gouge with his gloved thumb. Not deep enough to open anything, just enough to prove intent. Someone wanted what was behind that wall. The idea should have angered him. It did, but beneath the anger was something heavier. He had spent years breaking into dangerous places because mission demanded it. Now a stranger had broken into a dead man's grief. That felt worse. He called June first. Then, after a long hesitation, he called Nora at the diner and asked if there was anyone in Brindle Falls who understood old houses and rescue wiring. Nora did not ask why. She only said, "Owen Briggs." Owen arrived 2 hours later in an orange rescue parka, so faded it had become the color of old pumpkins. He was 62, broad across the shoulders but slowed by age, with a square face carved deep by wind and hard winters. A short silver beard covered his jaw, and thin gray hair escaped beneath a wool cap. His eyes were blue-gray and bluntly honest. The eyes of a man who had pulled too many bodies from cold water to waste time decorating the truth. He limped slightly as he crossed the porch, carrying a toolbox in one hand. June Harlan followed behind him, smaller in the shadow of his bulk, her camel coat buttoned to the throat. Her dark blonde hair was pinned low, but loose strands had escaped around her pale face. She looked nervous enough to apologize to the weather. Owen stopped just inside the foyer and looked around. For a long moment, his face changed. Not softened. Changed. Like the house had placed an old photograph into his hands. "Been a long time," he said. "You knew Elias," Ethan said. Owen nodded once. "Trained him on ice response. First thing I taught him was never trust pretty ice. Second thing was never argue with Mabel when she had soup in her hand." June smiled faintly, despite herself. Ranger stepped closer to Owen, sniffed his boots. then his sleeve. Instead of pulling away, Owen lowered one big scarred hand and let the dog decide. "Good animal," Owen murmured. Ranger accepted the compliment with grave seriousness. Upstairs, Owen examined the wall, then the pry marks. His expression hardened. "Somebody's been at this." "Yes." "You call the sheriff?" Ethan said nothing. Owen glanced at him, understood enough, and grunted. Together they checked the boards, ceiling line, and base structure. Owen tapped the wall with the handle of a screwdriver, listening. June compared old county drawings to the hallway shape, frowning as she tried to make the decades line up. "This wall isn't load-bearing," Owen said finally. "It was added over the original doorway. Whoever built it knew enough not to wreck the house." "Mabel hired someone after Elias died," June said quietly. Owen looked at the boards as if they were a coffin lid. "She couldn't look at his room," he said. "Can't blame her. Some doors don't close, so people build walls." Ethan's throat tightened unexpectedly. There were rooms inside him like that. No wood over them, no nails, just discipline, silence, and the old military habit of moving forward because stopping would let everything catch up. Owen removed a small thermal reader from his toolbox and scanned the wall. A faint beep sounded near the upper right section. "Warm spot," he said. June took a step back. "From the light?" "Maybe. Could be a battery pack cycling. Could be old wiring heating. Could be a fire waiting for permission." That made the decision for Ethan. He did not open the wall because of curiosity. He opened it because the house might burn around the last room Mabel had tried to protect. Outside, wind began to rise. By late afternoon, snow swept across North Lark Lake in long white veils. The sky lowered into a dull iron color. Nora called once to warn that the county had issued a storm advisory. Roads near the lake were icing faster than expected. "Don't do anything stupid," she said. Ethan looked at Owen prying the first trim board loose, while June held a flashlight, and Ranger watched like a furry supervisor. "Define stupid." Nora sighed. "Men." Then she hung up. Board by board, the false wall came apart. The sound of nails pulling from old wood echoed down the hallway. Each crack felt too loud. June flinched more than once. Owen worked slowly, respectfully, stacking each removed board against the opposite wall as if even the barrier deserved gentleness. Ethan helped, but with every board removed, unease grew inside him. He had cleared rooms in war, kicked doors, entered places where danger waited with teeth and metal. This felt nothing like that. This felt like opening someone's last prayer. When the final large board came loose, Ranger suddenly stepped forward and placed himself in front of Ethan. Not aggressively, protectively. His ears flattened, then lifted again. His nose pointed towards the darkness behind the wall. From inside came a soft click, then another. The yellow light flickered once, weak as a candle taking breath. June whispered, "Oh my God." Owen removed his cap. Behind the boards stood an old bedroom door, painted white, its brass knob dulled with age. Dust covered everything except one place near the bottom, a narrow line. As if, for years, warmth had breathed through the crack beneath the door. Ethan looked down at Ranger. The dog did not growl. He only sat, bowed his head slightly, and waited. Like even he understood this was not a door to be broken through. It was a door to be asked open. Ethan turned the knob. The door resisted at first, swollen from age. Then it gave with a tired sigh. The room beyond smelled of dust, old wool, paper, and the faint metallic tang of dormant electronics. Ethan stepped inside first, flashlight lowered, though he barely needed it. The small emergency lamp beside the window glowed dimly gold. It did not fill the room. It revealed it piece by piece. A rescue jacket hung on a peg near the door, orange fabric faded but still sturdy. Below it stood a pair of winter boots, soles crusted with ancient mud. A map of North Lark Lake covered one wall, marked with pencil circles and red string. A radio unit sat on the desk beneath a film of dust. Beside it, a coffee cup had dried into a dark ring at the bottom, as if Elias had only stepped out and might return to complain it had gone cold. The bed was made. That was what broke something in Ethan. Not the equipment, not the dust, not the light. The bed. Blanket tucked neatly. Pillow straight. A mother's final act of denial pressed into fabric and left untouched through nearly 10 winters. June covered her mouth with one hand. Owen stood in the doorway, broad shoulders trembling once before he mastered himself. "Damn fool, kid," he whispered, but his voice carried love, not insult. Ranger walked in slowly. He sniffed the boots, then the bed frame. Finally, he lowered himself beside the bed and rested his head on his paws. Ethan turned away because his chest had tightened too hard. He thought of the teammate he had lost overseas, the bunk left empty, the gear packed by someone else, the terrible efficiency of military grief, where the dead were honored, boxed, shipped, folded, saluted, and carried forward. Mabel had done the opposite. She had stopped time, and somehow Ethan understood both. Owen checked the lamp and battery unit carefully. "Solar backup," he said after a while, voice rough. "Panel line must still be getting trickle charge from the roof. Cold's messing with the sensor, that's why it cycles." "So the light was real," June said. "Real as anything." Ethan moved to the desk. He did not want to search, but the room had already been violated by someone else. Leaving it untouched no longer protected Elias. It protected whoever had tried to get inside. In the top drawer, beneath old rescue forms, he found a small handheld recorder and a stack of folded maps. Owen saw the recorder and went still. "That his?" Ethan nodded. "Don't play it here," Owen said quickly. Too quickly. Ethan looked at him. Owen's jaw worked once. "Not because I'm hiding anything. Because if that's from the last call, you'd better be sure before you let ghosts start talking." The storm hit hard before they could decide what to do next. Wind slammed against the house with enough force to rattle the windows. Snow erased the yard within minutes. June checked her phone and went pale. "Road's already bad." Owen glanced outside. "You're not driving down that hill in this." Then came the first knock. All 4 of them froze. It came again, weak but urgent. Ethan went downstairs with Ranger ahead of him. On the porch stood a young truck driver in his 20s, soaked in snow, face red from cold. He was lanky, with a patchy beard and frightened eyes, wearing a denim jacket too thin for the weather. "My rig slid near the lower bend," he stammered. "Phone's got no signal. I saw lights." Ethan looked past him into the white storm. Lights. For years, people had feared them. Tonight, they had brought someone to the door. "Come in," Ethan said. The man nearly sagged with relief. His name was Tyler Moss. He had been hauling frozen produce toward the interstate when the road vanished under ice. He apologized 3 times for dripping on the floor until Nora arrived 20 minutes later in a battered Subaru, swearing at the storm like it owed her money. She came with soup in 2 large pots, a medical kit, and a wool blanket over one arm. "I told you not to do anything stupid," she said, pushing past Ethan. "You drove here in a blizzard." "I'm a professional hypocrite. Move." Behind her came a small girl, wrapped in an oversized yellow coat, shivering so hard her teeth clicked. Nora guided her inside with one hand on her shoulder. "This is Ellie Pike," Nora said more quietly. "Her grandmother's heat went out. I found them near the diner trying to get to the church hall, but the church lost power. Ellie was 8, maybe 9, thin as a matchstick, with messy light brown hair escaping from beneath a gray knit hat. Her pale face looked too serious for a child, and her large gray-blue eyes moved around the room as if checking every exit. One of her mittens was blue, the other green. She clutched them together like mismatched prayers. Ranger approached slowly. Ellie stiffened. The dog stopped, lowered his head, and wagged once, only once, a formal introduction. Ellie stared at him, then whispered, "He looks like he knows secrets." Ethan glanced toward the stairs, toward the room above them where Elias's light still glowed. "Yeah," he said softly. "He does." By evening, Mercy House had changed. Not fully, not yet. But enough. Soup warmed on the stove. Tyler sat near the fireplace, wrapped in one of Ethan's blankets. June made phone calls from the kitchen, trying to find which roads were closed. Owen checked the old generator. Nora moved through the house, as if she had been born carrying bowls through storms. Ellie sat on the floor beside Ranger, one small hand resting carefully on his harness. The dog remained still, lending her his warmth as if it were part of his training. Upstairs, the open room of Elias Wren glowed softly down the hallway. No ghost descended. No miracle announced itself. Just a light, still working after years of cold. Just a house, opening its doors because winter had asked. Ethan stood in the living room, watching snow lash the windows. He had bought Mercy House to disappear from people. Now people were inside it, cold, frightened, grateful, alive. And despite himself, despite the old ache in his chest, despite the danger pressing closer from unseen roads, Ethan felt the house settle around them like it had been waiting for this sound again. Footsteps, breathing, soup spoons against bowls, a child whispering to a dog. Mercy House had not awakened with a scream. It had awakened with warmth. By morning, Mercy House smelled like soup, wet wool, dog fur, and old smoke. It was the strangest comfort Ethan Calder had ever known. Outside, the storm had softened into drifting snow. Pale light crept over North Lark Lake, turning the frozen surface silver beneath a sky the color of cold tin. Inside the house, Tyler Moss slept crookedly in the armchair near the fireplace, one boot still on, the other sitting beside him like it had surrendered in the night. Nora Bellamy stood in the kitchen stirring what remained of the soup, looking as if she had conquered the blizzard personally and found it mildly disappointing. Ellie Pike sat on the living room floor beside Ranger, her mismatched gloves folded in her lap. The small girl's yellow coat swallowed her thin frame, and her messy light brown hair stuck out from under her knit hat in stubborn little wisps. Wasson Ranger lay with his cream gray body curved around her side, not touching too much, but close enough to lend warmth. Ethan watched them from the hallway. He had bought Mercy House to disappear. Now there were boot prints in the entryway, bowls in the sink, a child whispering to his dog, and a dead man's room glowing softly upstairs. Somehow, the house looked less haunted. Or maybe it had simply stopped being lonely. Owen Briggs came down from the second floor with dust on his sleeves and grief tucked back behind his eyes. The old rescue captain had spent half the night checking the wires in Elias's room, muttering at the battery pack as if it were an unruly recruit. "Solar line's weak, but not dead," Owen said, pouring himself coffee. "That lamp's been sipping power like an old man nursing whiskey. Sensor's bad. Cold triggers it." Nora glanced up. "So the ghost is bad wiring?" "Most ghosts are," Owen said. Ellie looked offended on behalf of the supernatural. "Maybe some ghosts are wiring, and some wiring is ghosts." Owen opened his mouth, failed to improve on that, and drank his coffee. Ethan nearly smiled. That was when the first car slowed outside, then a second. By noon, 2 locals had come by, just to check whether everyone survived. One was an elderly widow named Ruth Hanley, wrapped in a purple coat with a fur-lined hood, carrying a jar of peaches as if paying tribute to a small kingdom. The other was a farmer with a red face and hands like split firewood, who claimed he had extra generator fuel he didn't need. though Owen muttered that nobody in Brindle Falls ever had extra generator fuel in winter unless they were lying for charity. People did not stay long, but they looked around. At the fireplace, at the soup pot, at the stairs leading up to the opened room, at Ranger, who greeted each visitor with solemn inspection, as though deciding whether their soul needed coffee or judgment. By evening, Mercy House had become a rumor with steam rising from it. Nora returned with fresh bread. Owen patched a loose section of porch railing. June arrived just before dusk, with a folder clutched against her chest and snow in her hair. She looked nervous, pale, and determined, a combination Ethan had learned to respect. "I found old emails," she said. "Not enough to bury anyone. Enough to prove pressure." She handed Ethan printed copies. Names, dates, messages from her broker, mentions of Vale Harbor properties. Phrases like accelerate auction clearance and avoid unnecessary historical complications. June's fingers trembled slightly. "If Gideon learns I gave you those, I'm finished." Ethan looked at her. Then why bring them?" June's face tightened with shame, and something braver beneath it. "Because I sold you a house without telling you it was standing in front of a wolf." Before Ethan could answer, Ranger lifted his head. A black SUV rolled up the hill. It parked cleanly near the edge of the drive, tires stopping precisely where the snow had been cleared. The driver's door opened. The man who stepped out looked wrong against Mercy House, too polished for the weather, too smooth for the old hill and patched porch. Gideon Vale was about 45, medium height, trim in a way that suggested expensive gyms and better mirrors. His light brown hair was combed back perfectly, untouched by the wind. His face was handsome and cold, with bright skin, a narrow jaw, and a polite smile that never reached his pale blue eyes. He wore a charcoal wool coat over a black turtleneck, dark trousers, black leather gloves, and spotless shoes that had no business surviving a snowy driveway. He looked like a man who had never entered a room without first calculating its value. "Mr. Calder," Gideon called warmly. "I'm glad I caught you." Ranger stood, not barking. That was worse. Ethan stepped onto the porch. Gideon's gaze moved briefly over the house, then the people visible through the front windows. Nora in the kitchen. Ellie near the fire. Owen in the hall. June standing behind Ethan with the folder now held too tightly. A flicker of irritation crossed Gideon's face. It vanished instantly. "I heard you had quite a night," he said. "Storms can make heroes out of all of us." "I opened a door," Ethan said. "Wouldn't call that heroism. Modesty. Admirable." Gideon climbed the porch steps without being invited. A Ranger moved between him and the threshold. Gideon stopped. For the first time, the smile thinned. "Beautiful dog. Smart, too," Ethan said. "So I see." Gideon took a folded envelope from inside his coat. "I'll be direct. Mercy House is an old property with serious liabilities, structural problems, electrical risk, now public safety exposure. You're a veteran, and I respect service deeply, truly. I'd hate to see you buried under lawsuits because you were kind at the wrong moment." Ethan did not take the envelope. "What is that?" "An offer. More than you paid. Considerably more." Inside the house, Nora had gone still. June's face drained. Gideon lowered his voice slightly. "You can walk away with dignity, Mr. Calder. Start fresh somewhere that doesn't ask so much of you." For one instant, the offer struck somewhere tender. Start fresh. As if that were a place. As if leaving ever meant ghosts stopped following. Ethan looked past Gideon toward the lake, where wind swept snow across the ice like white smoke. Then he looked back. "No." Gideon's smile remained, but something behind his eyes closed. "No?" The house isn't for sale. Everything is, eventually. Not this. Gideon studied him for a long moment. Then he slid the envelope back into his coat. Old houses teach expensive lessons. Ranger gave one low rumble. Gideon stepped down from the porch, careful not to let his polished shoes slip. As he reached the SUV, he glanced once toward the upstairs window where Elias's old room faced the lake. That glance was too quick, but Ethan saw it. Gideon knew. That night, the story appeared online. A local news page posted a blurry photograph of Mercy House taken through falling snow. Martinson. The headline read, New owner turns notorious ghost house into unsafe roadside shelter. Below it, the article described Ethan as a recently discharged combat veteran with unknown mental health history. It mentioned children inside the house, electrical hazards, unlicensed shelter activity, public risk. It never mentioned the storm. It never mentioned Nora's soup, Tyler's frozen hands, Ellie's trembling body, or the fact that Mercy House had kept people alive when the road disappeared. Ethan read the article twice. By the third time, his hands had gone still. Ranger approached quietly and laid his head on Ethan's knee. The dog did not understand headlines, but he understood when a man was being pushed toward a ledge. Ethan's chest tightened with an old battlefield feeling. The moment before blame became permanent, when truth moved too slowly and accusation moved like fire. And for the first time since buying the house, Ethan wondered if Gideon had chosen the perfect weapon. Not violence. Doubt. The next morning, fewer cars slowed outside Mercy House. People still looked, but now they looked with caution. Tyler left after Owen helped arrange a tow, shaking Ethan's hand too hard and promising to tell people what really happened. Ruth Hanley sent a loaf of bread but did not come in. June called to say her broker had suspended her access to company files. Nora arrived furious enough to make the front door afraid. That article is trash, she snapped. It's effective trash, Ethan said. Nora slammed a paper bag of biscuits onto the counter. Don't you dare start sounding reasonable about cowards. I'm responsible if someone gets hurt here. And people were already hurt out there. Ethan looked toward the window. Ellie was gone now, taken back to her grandmother once the roads cleared. But he could still see the small imprint she had left in the blanket by the fire, a little hollow of warmth. Responsibility was a blade with two edges. Open the door, and danger came in. Keep it closed, and someone froze outside. Late afternoon brought Deputy Hannah Cole. She arrived in a dark blue winter sheriff's uniform beneath a thick badge jacket, snow crusting her black boots. She was 31, broad-shouldered and strong in a practical way, with dark brown hair tied tightly at the nape of her neck. Her face was serious, square at the jaw, softened only by warm brown eyes that still believed rules were meant to protect people, not bury them. She removed her gloves at the door. I'm not here to shut you down, she said before Ethan could speak. That's usually what people say before shutting something down. Her mouth twitched. Fair. She looked around the living room, taking in the blankets, the fire extinguisher Owen had placed near the kitchen, the soup pot, the open path to the door. This can't operate as a shelter, she said. Not officially. Not without inspections, insurance, permits, emergency planning. I know. But during weather emergencies, the county can list temporary warming locations if they meet basic safety standards and connect with emergency management. Ethan studied her. Why are you telling me this? Hannah's eyes moved toward the stairs. Because my grandmother ate here once, before I was born. Mabel gave her dry socks and made her call home after she ran away from a bad man. Nora, in the kitchen, went very quiet. Hannah continued, professional again. You'll need smoke detectors, clear exits, generator safety, sign-in sheets during storms, and a church or non-profit partner willing to vouch for supplies. Nora crossed her arms. I can handle supplies. Owen grunted from the doorway. I'll handle detectors. Hannah looked at Ethan. You handle staying alive long enough to fill out forms. Forms might kill me first. Then die alphabetically. Government prefers order. Even Ranger seemed to approve of her. By dusk, Mercy House had a list taped to the refrigerator. Not a dream. A list. Smoke detectors. Fire extinguishers. Generator ventilation. Emergency contact numbers. County office. Church basement coordinator. Insurance inquiry. Ethan stared at it for a long time. Maybe kindness needed more than open doors. As maybe it needed screws, signatures, batteries, and someone stubborn enough to make soup while the world argued. Then Mara Finch called. Her voice came through tight and low. I recovered part of the USB. Ethan straightened. What did you find? Payroll files, shell company names, Rachel Pike's initials on exported records. A pause. And a scanned map of the old service road near the North Boathouse. The warehouse. Storage building. Abandoned now. Used to belong to a marina contractor. Ethan, there are notes in Elias's journal that match the file names. Ranger, lying near the fireplace, suddenly lifted his head. Mara continued. If there are hard copies, they may be there. Ethan looked toward the dark windows. Snow had begun again. Light, steady, quiet. He should have called Hannah. He should have waited. But the torn fabric upstairs still smelled of lake mud, and Gideon's glance toward Elias's window still burned in his mind. An hour later, Ethan stood near the old North Boathouse with Ranger at his side. The storage building crouched beyond a line of black pines, half buried in snow, its tin roof bent under ice. Wind moved across the lake behind it. The place smelled of rust, frozen algae, and old fuel. Ranger lowered his nose to the ground. He found the scent almost immediately. Black fabric, cologne, mud. Ethan followed him to a side door hanging slightly off its hinges. Inside, the beam of his flashlight passed over stacked crates, collapsed shelving, and a metal file cabinet shoved beneath a tarp. The cabinet drawer was locked. Ethan opened it with a pry bar from his truck. Inside were folders, property maps, lake corridor surveys, names he had seen in Elias's notebook, and then headlights swept across the broken wall. Ranger froze. Outside, tires crunched over snow. A door slammed. Then another. Ethan killed the flashlight. The building plunged into darkness. Ranger stood silent beside him, body low, waiting. From outside, a man's voice said, "He's in there." Ethan closed his hand around the folder. Now the house, the room, the light, the lies, everything had narrowed to this frozen building by the lake, and someone had finally come out of the dark to stop him. The first thing Ethan Calder did was turn off his breathing. Not literally. He slowed it until his chest barely moved, until the old rhythm returned from places he wished he could forget. Inhale through the nose. Hold. Listen. Measure distance by sound. Measure danger by patience. Outside the storage building, boots crushed snow. 2 men. Maybe 3. One stood near the side door. Another moved around the front. A third stayed farther back by the vehicle. Engine idling low beneath the wind. Ranger crouched beside Ethan in the dark, cream-gray body low, amber eyes fixed on the doorway. The German shepherd did not bark. He understood silence like a language older than command. Ethan slid the property folders beneath his combat shirt close to his body. The paper felt absurdly fragile for something men were willing to threaten him over. A flashlight beam cut through a crack in the wall. "A Calder," a man called. "You don't want to make this worse." The voice was rough. Local. Not Gideon's. Hired muscle, maybe. Someone who thought intimidation was easier than thinking. Ethan scanned the room. Collapsed shelves, rusted hooks, a broken window half covered by plywood, a stack of old boat cushions, a chain hanging from the ceiling beam. Not a battlefield, but every room had exits if a man was calm enough to see them. He picked up a small metal washer from the floor and threw it hard toward the opposite corner. It struck a paint can. The sound cracked through the building. The man outside cursed. The flashlight swung away. Ethan moved. Ranger went first, slipping through shadow like winter-given teeth. Ethan followed, low and fast, using the shelving as cover. When the side door opened, he slammed it outward with his shoulder. The man behind it stumbled back into the snow, but Ranger lunged, not biting flesh but driving hard into the man's legs. The man yelped and fell into a drift beside the wall, his flashlight spinning white circles across the ground. Ethan did not stop to fight. He ran. The second man came around the corner holding something dark in his hand, a baton, maybe a tire iron. Ethan stepped inside the swing, caught the wrist, turned the man's momentum, and sent him shoulder first into the side of the building. The impact rattled the tin wall. "Stay down," Ethan said. His voice sounded colder than the air. The man obeyed. Ranger was already moving toward the tree line. Ethan followed, snow filling his boots, wind cutting across his face. Behind him, someone shouted into a phone. By the time headlights swept the pines, Ethan and Ranger were gone. They circled wide through the woods, using the frozen drainage ditch to avoid the road, and it took 40 minutes to reach Mercy House. Ethan's lungs burned by then. Not from age, from anger held too tightly. The house glowed ahead through falling snow. Warm windows, a roofline still wounded by years, a light upstairs in Elias's room, faint but steady. For a moment, Ethan stopped beneath the apple tree and bent one hand against his knee. Ranger stood beside him, steam rising from his muzzle. "You good?" Ethan whispered. Ranger shook snow from his fur, then sneezed directly onto Ethan's pant leg. "Yeah, heroic." The absurdity steadied him. Inside, Nora Bellamy was waiting with a rolling pin in one hand. She looked ready to use it on either burglars or idiots, depending on who entered first. Her brown and silver hair had come loose from its tie, and her thick green sweater was dusted with flour. Behind her, Mara Finch stood near the kitchen table, sharp-eyed and pale, laptop open, sleeves pushed up. Owen Briggs sat near the fireplace with one boot off, wrapping tape around a cracked flashlight. June Harlan stood by the window, arms folded tight across her camel coat. They all looked at the folders under Ethan's shirt, then at his face. Nora lowered the rolling pin. "You went to the warehouse alone." "Not alone," Ethan said. Ranger walked past them toward the fire as if he had personally supervised the entire operation and found human performance barely acceptable. Mara exhaled. "That does not make it better." Ethan set the folders on the table. The room changed. Everyone moved closer. Property maps, survey notes, shell company documents, copies of land purchase agreements, names circled in red pencil, elderly residents, lakeside addresses, heating shutoff notices, emergency access easements. Mara's fingers hovered over one page. "This matches the recovered USB." June's face went white. These are option agreements. Some of these signatures. Forged? Nora asked. June swallowed. Or obtained under pressure. Either way, ugly. Owen leaned over one map and tapped a thick finger on a marked road. That's the old rescue route. We begged the town to keep that maintained after Elias died. Mara looked up. Why didn't they? No one answered at first. Then a voice came from the doorway. Because money went somewhere else. Sheriff Callum Voss stood just inside the living room, snow on his shoulders, badge dull beneath the yellow light. No one had heard him come in. Ranger rose immediately, not growling, but alert. The fire snapped behind him like a judge clearing its throat. Callum looked older than he had the day before. His long face seemed carved from guilt now, every line deeper. His brown eyes moved to the folders, then to Ethan. You were followed from the warehouse, he said. By your people? The question struck. Callum flinched, almost invisibly. No. But you know whose. His jaw tightened. Nora stepped forward. Callum. Her voice carried years of knowing him, years of disappointment, too. Tell the truth, or leave this house. The sheriff looked toward the staircase, toward the open room above. For a moment, Ethan thought he would retreat behind the badge again. Instead, Callum removed his hat. I was with Elias the night he died, he said. The room went very still. Owen stood so quickly the chair scraped backward. You were not with him, the old rescue captain said, voice shaking. You were on the second unit. You came late. Callum nodded once. I came late because we had no working South Road rig. Because the rescue access road had been left uncleared for 2 seasons. Because funding got delayed, rerouted, promised again, then delayed again. His eyes lifted toward Elias's room. And because I signed off on reports that said the delays were unavoidable. The fire popped. No one moved. Callum's voice dropped lower. Elias knew those delays weren't natural. He had started asking who benefited if the old rescue route failed. Who needed the north access closed long enough to call it obsolete. Owen's face twisted. Why didn't you say something? Callum's mouth opened, but the answer took time climbing out. Because Gideon Vale came after the funeral with new radios, winter tires, fuel grants, said the department needed stability, said families didn't need more scandal while they were grieving. He looked at Ethan now. And because I was ashamed that Elias went out with failing equipment while I stayed alive. For one suspended moment, Mercy House seemed to hold its breath. Then Ranger did something strange. He walked to Callum, sat in front of him, and stared up. Not forgiving, not condemning, waiting. The sheriff's face broke slightly, and Ethan understood. Sometimes judgment did not arrive with thunder. Sometimes it came on 4 paws and asked a man whether he was finally done lying. By morning, Callum had given them copies of old incident reports he had kept locked in his office for years. Not enough to convict Gideon alone. Enough to crack the stone. Deputy Hannah Cole arrived before sunrise, called by Callum himself. Her dark blue uniform was crisp despite the storm, hair tied tightly, brown eyes sharper than Ethan had seen them before. But she took one look at the documents and stopped being merely helpful. She became official. I'm sending this to state police, she said. Not county, not through Callum's office. Direct. Callum accepted that without argument. Hannah looked at him. You understand what this means for you? Yes. Do you? Callum nodded slowly. Probably not fully. Good, at least you're honest this morning. Nora muttered, Miracles do happen. The day unfolded strangely, People began coming to Mercy House, not in crowds at first, one by one, then by twos. Ruth Hanley came with trembling hands and a folder wrapped in plastic. The old widow's purple coat looked brighter than she felt. She admitted a man connected to Vale Harbor had visited her after her husband died, telling her winter taxes would ruin her unless she sold fast. A retired mechanic named Leonard Cross arrived next. He was in his late 60s, barrel-chested, with oil-darkened fingernails, a gray mustache, and one cloudy eye. He had once repaired Mabel's generator and remembered seeing a black SUV outside Mercy House 2 days before Elias died. Nora told her story in the kitchen while stirring soup she did not need to stir. Her younger sister had once run to Mabel after fleeing a violent husband. Mercy House had given her 3 nights, dry clothes, and the courage to keep driving. Mara spoke last. She did not cry. Her voice stayed flat, almost too controlled. At 16, she had slept under Mabel's kitchen table because home had become unsafe and the county shelter was full. Mabel had placed a blanket over her without asking questions. She said I could talk when words stopped hurting, Mara said. Then she looked at Ethan. They still hurt. But I'm talking anyway. By evening, Mercy House was full of testimony. Not legal testimony yet. Human testimony. The older, messier kind that came with coffee stains, shaking hands, and memories carried too long in silence. June scanned documents. Hannah photographed evidence. Owen marked old rescue maps. Nora fed everyone because apparently revolution in Brindle Falls required chili. Outside, snow fell again. Then the power went out. Every lamp in Mercy House died at once. The room dropped into darkness. For half a second, old fear returned. Ethan felt it move through the people like a cold draft. Someone gasped. A chair scraped. Ellie, who had arrived with her grandmother just before dusk, whispered Ranger's name from the floor near the fireplace. Ranger moved to her immediately. Then, upstairs, a soft click sounded. At the yellow light in Elias's room came on. Dim. Steady. It poured down the stairwell like a small sun refusing burial. No one spoke. Owen covered his face with one hand. Callum stood near the door, staring upward, tears silvering his eyes but not falling. Ethan watched the light touch every face in the room. Nora's fierce grief, Mara's guarded courage, June's guilt becoming resolve, Hannah's steady anger, Callum's broken shame, Ellie's quiet wonder. For years, people had feared that light. Now it made them stay. Callum stepped forward and placed a small, sealed envelope on the table. I kept the original radio log from that night, he said, the one that never made it into the file. Owen lowered his hand. Callum's voice shook once. It shows Elias called in the road failure before he went onto the ice. It shows we knew the route was unsafe. And it shows the maintenance request had been denied after pressure from Vale Harbor's development consultant. Hannah picked up the envelope carefully. Callum, she said, this may end your career. He looked upstairs toward Elias's light. It should have ended my silence sooner. No one forgave him. Not then. Maybe not ever. But something shifted. A town that had hidden behind whispers began handing its fear to the table, piece by piece. And Mercy House, old and patched and wind-beaten, took it all in without judgment. Near midnight, Ethan stepped onto the porch. Ranger followed. The storm had softened. Snow fell straight down now, gentle as ash, covering tire tracks, roof lines, old mistakes. Through the windows behind him, voices murmured. Papers moved. Someone laughed quietly at something Nora said. Ethan looked up at Elias's room. The yellow lamp glowed against the dark, and not a ghost, not a curse, a witness. Ranger leaned against Ethan's leg, warm and solid. "You knew before I did," Ethan said. The dog sighed, as if this was obvious and exhausting. Ethan placed one hand on Ranger's head. For the first time since coming to Brindle Falls, he did not feel like a man standing outside another family's grief. He felt like someone had handed him the watch. And inside Mercy House, the town finally stopped being afraid of the light. Spring did not arrive in Brindle Falls all at once. It came cautiously, like someone knocking before entering a room of grieving people. First, the snow softened along the porch steps of Mercy House. Then thin water began running beneath the old apple tree, carving tiny silver paths through the mud. North Lark Lake remained frozen in the middle, but near the shoreline, dark cracks opened like sleepy eyes. The pines still wore winter on their shoulders, yet the sunlight had changed. It no longer looked sharp enough to cut. Ethan Calder noticed these things because Mercy House made him notice. Before this place, mornings had been something to survive. Wake before the nightmare finished. Check the locks. Count the exits. Drink coffee black enough to punish the body for continuing. Now mornings had weight. Wood to stack, pipes to check, coffee to brew. Josim, a sign-in clipboard to place near the door whenever the weather service warned of freezing temperatures. Smoke detector batteries to replace because Owen Briggs had become spiritually offended by expired safety equipment. Ranger approved of the new routine. The 6-year-old German Shepherd moved through Mercy House like he owned the deed, the furniture, and at least 3 human souls. His cream-gray coat caught the soft morning light, and his black harness with dark red trim had become as familiar to visitors as the smell of Nora's soup. He greeted regulars with solemn dignity, tolerated children with saintly patience, and judged anyone who entered wearing too much cologne. Ethan trusted that judgment more than most legal documents. The investigation into Gideon Vale had not ended quickly. Real justice, Ethan learned, did not move like thunder, but it moved like winter melt, slow, cold, persistent, finding cracks no one had sealed properly. State police came first, then financial investigators, then lawyers with briefcases and faces that looked allergic to small-town coffee. Vale Harbor Properties was not destroyed overnight, but the project around North Lark Lake was suspended. Bank accounts were reviewed. Land purchases were frozen. Several elderly residents received letters from attorneys saying their transactions were under examination. Gideon himself disappeared from public view for a while. No one missed his polished shoes. Sheriff Callum Voss resigned before the county could force him out. The resignation letter was brief. No excuses. No poetry. Just responsibility, the kind that arrived late but still had to enter through the front door. Ethan saw him once afterward. Callum stood across the road from Mercy House near sunset, hat in hand, staring up at Elias's window. He looked smaller without the badge. Older, too. His tall, lean frame seemed bent under years of swallowed truth. Ethan did not invite him in that day. Mercy was not the same as forgetting. But Ranger walked down the porch steps, crossed the yard, and stood beside the former sheriff for almost a full minute. Callum looked down at the dog. Then he wept without making a sound. Ethan turned away and let him have that much. Not forgiveness. Not yet. But a place to stand while regret finally found his throat. The hardest return came 2 weeks later. Rachel Pike arrived in a gray sedan with out-of-state plates and a cracked rear bumper. She stepped out slowly, as if expecting the entire town to accuse her of surviving. Well, she was 34, thin in a way that did not look natural, with light brown hair falling to her shoulders and a face drawn tight by years of hiding. Her navy puffer coat was old, one sleeve patched near the wrist. A gray sweater showed at the collar. Her boots were scuffed almost white at the toes. Her eyes were what Ethan noticed most. Gray-blue, exhausted, terrified, alive. Deputy Hannah Cole brought her in. Hannah remained in uniform, dark blue coat buttoned, brown hair tied tight, serious face softened by the careful gentleness she used around wounded people who might bolt if spoken to too loudly. Ellie Pike was in the living room when her mother entered. The girl had been sitting beside Ranger, working on homework with the grim determination of a judge reviewing evidence. Her yellow coat hung near the fire. One mismatched glove rested on Ranger's back because Ellie claimed he was better than a desk. When she looked up, the pencil fell from her hand. For a second, nobody moved. Rachel made a sound that was almost Ellie's name, but broke before becoming language. Then the little girl crossed the room, not running at first, walking, stunned, as if afraid the moment would vanish if she moved too fast, then running. Rachel dropped to her knees before Ellie reached her. Mother and daughter collided near the hearth, arms locking around each other with a force that seemed to tear years out of the walls. Rachel buried her face in Ellie's hair. Ellie clung to her mother's patched coat and sobbed with the raw, furious relief of a child who had been brave too long. Ranger stood and placed himself beside them, not interfering, guarding the miracle. Ethan looked away. So did Nora, and even Owen pretended to inspect the ceiling, though his eyes were shining beneath his gray brows. Later, when the room had quieted, and Rachel could speak in broken pieces, she asked to see Elias's room. Ethan led her upstairs with Hannah, Owen, and Ellie following behind. Ranger went first, paws soft on the old steps. The room of remembrance had not been changed much. Ethan had dusted it. Owen had made the wiring safe. June had found a simple glass case for Elias's rescue radio, and Nora had placed a small bowl of dried lavender on the desk because, in her words, grief should smell better than dust if it insists on staying. The orange rescue jacket still hung near the door. The map of North Lark remained on the wall. The yellow lamp glowed softly by the window, now wired safely to the solar backup Elias had built. Rachel stood in the doorway and covered her mouth. "He told me to come here," she whispered. "That night. He said if anything went wrong, Mercy House would keep the light on." Ellie reached for her mother's hand. Rachel stepped inside and placed a folded paper on Elias's desk. It was a copy of the original payroll file tying Vale Harbor's consultant to the shell companies. Not a new revelation. A final missing piece. Ethan looked at the little lamp. For years, people had called it a haunting. Maybe they had been right in the only way that mattered. Some lights were haunted by promises. After Rachel's testimony, the investigation no longer depended on memory alone. It had documents, witnesses, radio logs, financial trails. Fear began changing sides. Mercy House changed too, but not into something grand. It did not become a non-profit headquarters with banners and a smiling board of directors. It did not get renovated into polished charm for magazines. The porch still leaned slightly to the left. One kitchen cabinet refused to close unless kicked in just the right place. The upstairs bathroom made a sound like a dying goose whenever someone ran hot water. But Deputy Hannah helped Ethan file the right paperwork. Mercy House became an approved community warming location during weather emergencies, connected through the county emergency office and supported by the church, Nora's Diner, and a growing list of townspeople who signed up to bring food, blankets, batteries, or simply themselves. Nora Bellamy ran Friday suppers like a benevolent war campaign. She arrived in her thick green sweater and brown apron, red scarf tucked at her throat, carrying pots large enough to baptize a moose. Owen repaired steps, railings, wiring, and occasionally people's attitudes. June Harlan handled forms and grant applications with a determination born from guilt, slowly becoming service. Mara Finch built a transparent donation spreadsheet and threatened to haunt anyone who rounded numbers creatively. Ethan mostly kept the fire going. That was what he told himself. But he did more. He learned who took coffee with sugar, who needed to sit facing the door, who became embarrassed accepting free food unless given a task, who came for soup but stayed because silence at home was too loud. He learned that not every rescue began with a helicopter or a rifle or a command shouted into the dark. Some began with clean socks, a chair near heat, a dog resting his head on someone's knee. Ethan still had bad nights. Some mornings he woke with his hand reaching for a weapon that was not there. Some sounds still pulled him backward. A dropped pan, a truck backfiring on the road, wind hitting the house at the wrong angle. But the difference was this: he no longer stayed alone in the dark. On those nights, he went downstairs. Ranger followed, always. Ethan would make coffee and sit in the kitchen while the house breathed around him. Sometimes Elias's lamp glowed upstairs. Sometimes it did not. Either way, Ethan understood now. Living was not betrayal. Surviving was not theft. The dead did not need the living to stay frozen beside them forever. They needed someone to carry the light forward without pretending it did not hurt. One late spring snowstorm came after everyone thought winter had finally surrendered. It began as rain, then sleet, then thick wet snow that coated branches and dragged power lines low. By dusk, North Lark Road was slick again. Mercy House's sign swung in the wind, newly painted by Ellie and crooked in 3 charming directions. Warm meal. Dry floor. No shame. Below it, Ethan had added a smaller line in black paint. Bought with one man's last savings. Kept alive by everyone's kindness. Nora said it was too sentimental. Then she cried in the pantry, where she thought no one saw. Around 9 that night, a knock came at the door. Ethan opened it to find a young man standing on the porch, soaked through, shivering hard. He was maybe 25, with black hair plastered to his forehead, a thin face, and frightened dark eyes. His jacket was cheap and too light for the storm. Behind him, far down the road, hazard lights blinked weakly through snow. "My car died," the young man said. "I don't have money for a tow yet. I just saw the light. I can go if this is private." Ethan looked down. Ranger was already sitting beside the door, tail tapping once. Waiting. Ethan stepped back. "Come in first," he said. We'll figure out the rest after." The young man's face crumpled with relief. Behind Ethan, Mercy House glowed. Nora's soup steamed in the kitchen. Owen cursed affectionately at a loose window latch. Mara argued with June over donation categories. Rachel sat beside Ellie near the fire, helping with spelling words. Hannah checked the emergency radio. Ranger escorted the stranger inside like a guardian from some old northern myth who had traded wings for fur and better judgment. Ethan looked up the stairs. Elias's lamp shone softly. Not bright, not dramatic, just steady. Once, people had feared that light. Now, tired travelers followed it home. Ethan closed the door against the storm. And Mercy House, old and patched and stubborn as grace itself, kept shining. Sometimes God does not send miracles with thunder. Sometimes he leaves one small light on in the dark, places one kind soul near a cold road, or sends a loyal dog to notice what wounded hearts cannot say. In everyday life, someone near us may be waiting for a warm meal, a gentle word, a second chance, or simply a place where they do not have to feel alone. If this story touched your heart, please share it with someone who still believes kindness can change a life. Leave a comment below and tell us where you are watching from, or share a moment when someone became a light for you. And if you want more stories of hope, healing, loyalty, and second chances, please subscribe to the channel. May God bless you and your family, protect your home, give strength to your heart, and leave a light on every road you still have to travel.